This is my dog, Milo. He's a perfectly happy dog as long as he gets cheese, playtime, belly rubs, and a spot on the couch. If we dropped him off in the wild, he probably wouldn't do too well. Not because he's weak, but because that environment doesn't support his needs. This is true of most animals, including Milo's ancestors, the wolves. In a healthy ecosystem, wolves are social animals, just like humans. They move constantly, regulate stress through connection, and they raise their young together. Now, imagine something changes, and the wolves start acting strange. The pack fractures, anxiety and aggression rise, fewer pups survive. If you saw this happening, you'd be alarmed, but you probably wouldn't assume there was suddenly something wrong with all their brains. You'd think something changed in the environment. So here's the question that made me uncomfortable. How come we tell a different story when we see the same patterns in humans? Right now, Gen Z is experiencing record levels of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. We are the most technologically advanced, materially comfortable generation in history, and yet by nearly every measure, the most psychologically distressed. My generation came of age during a time of significant change, a global pandemic, the rise of a digital world. And when we see the symptoms that follow, our typical solution is internal and biological. That's partially true. Medication can be life-saving. But if this crisis were caused only by individual brain chemistry, we'd expect it to be improving as prescriptions rise. It's not. This suggests there is a broader solution to mental health that medication was never designed to address. I didn't understand this at first, but eventually I recognized myself in those wolves. Milo was a pandemic puppy. My family got him when I was 13, and Milo made me very happy. But as the lockdown dragged on, I began struggling with clinical anxiety and depression. I spent most of my time in my bed, on my phone, scrolling, overthinking, imagining the worst. I felt deeply grateful for my life, but so confused by how bad I felt. For a long time, this was my reality, but I didn't want to live like that anymore. When life became in person again, I was at a new school with a new understanding. Nothing was going to change unless I changed how I was living. One afternoon, I saw a flyer for the crew team's meeting after school. I almost didn't go. I felt intimidated because I didn't know anyone and I had no experience, but I went anyway. I expected a short info session. I was wrong. Instead, we were thrown into a brutal workout. People were throwing up. Many walked out and left. And I felt proud of myself for making it through, but too scared to keep trying. I went home to tell my parents, I am never going back. Those people are crazy. But that feeling of accomplishment, it stayed with me, and it lingered just long enough to make me feel uncomfortable, because it forced a question I couldn't shake. Do I really want to continue to let fear stop me from changing my life? So I went back, and slowly things changed. I showed up at the same place, at the same time, with the same people, working towards something shared. My days had structure. I felt tired in a way that was earned. And without realizing it, I'd stopped living in my head and started living in the world again. By the time I graduated, I wasn't the same person. I had responsibility, real relationships, something I cared about deeply. Eventually, I was elected captain of the team. I remember watching the new kids struggle through the same workout I once barely survived, feeling proud of how far I'd come. I had meaning. But meaning, I learned, isn't permanent, and it isn't universal. Because when I left for college, everything that had anchored me disappeared, and once again, I felt untethered. This time, instead of panicking, I looked back. I realized what changed wasn't my personality or my circumstances, it was my lifestyle. But I didn't just change my habits. I changed the way I understood myself and my life. When I lived in a way that aligned with what I truly valued, my mental health improved again. That's when I began asking the bigger question: why did this keep working? That summer, I dove deep into philosophy, theology, and the wisdom of other cultures, and I was shocked by how much they actually agreed. Different people in different places at different times, pointing to the same key principles that create a fulfilling life. Then I saw the same ideas show up again in my classes, explained by science. That's when it clicked. This hadn't just happened to me. My experience wasn't extraordinary, and the solutions weren't random. My mental health wasn't the starting point, it was the result. In psychology, mental health is explained using the biopsychosocial model. This means your biology, your inner experience, and your environment all powerfully shape how we feel. But here's the part we tend to overlook. Mental health doesn't just live in your brain, it emerges from how you move through and experience the world. We do this through perception and behavior. We tend to think perception is passive and immediate. You open your eyes and there's the world. But your brain is actually guessing what's out there, filling in the gaps, and predicting what will happen next. And what guides those predictions is your worldview, your set of beliefs, values, and expectations about reality, like what's true, what matters, what a good life is, what the world is like, what people are like. And it quietly determines how you interpret everything. It's like the operating system your mind runs on. But most of us never consciously developed a worldview. We inherited it. For Gen Z, that inheritance was disrupted. Worldviews typically form through experience and reflection and shared narrative. Ours formed amid constant digital exposure and access to infinite information. During critical developmental years, screens replaced reality and isolation replaced community. Many of us learned about the world before we had the experience to interpret it, and unknowingly, we absorbed expectations about life, ourselves, and the future. And once you have a worldview, it becomes a lens. Imagine the person with the worldview, people eventually leave me. This worldview may seem subconscious or insignificant, but it quietly shapes everything they feel. So when we struggle with mental health downstream, the solution isn't always to fight those feelings directly. Sometimes the root is upstream. That person with that worldview that people eventually leave them, let's say they receive a text from a friend that says, "Can we talk?" The message is neutral, but through that worldview, it gets interpreted as dangerous. The mind fills in the gaps. This is confrontation. This is rejection. And that perception triggers anxiety and threat. To protect themselves, they behave by avoiding the situation. Over time, this pattern becomes a lifestyle, emotional distance, fewer close relationships. And that lifestyle produces the very outcome they fear, loneliness. Their mental health suffers, and the original belief now feels proven. Nothing about the original message caused this. The silent expectation did. Research strongly supports these insights, pointing to three major drivers of mental health. First, how we see the world. The neuroscientist Anil Seth describes our experience of the world as a controlled hallucination. That might sound dramatic, but the implication is simple. Your brain is constantly predicting what reality is like, and those predictions powerfully shape how it feels to live in it. What you constantly feed your attention becomes the evidence your brain uses to predict reality. So be intentional as to what you consume. Second, how we live in our bodies. If perception is predictive, then the body is the largest source of evidence our brain has to determine if the world is safe. Two inputs matter most: exercise and sleep. A Duke University study randomly assigned participants with major depression to either take antidepressant medication or engage in regular aerobic exercise 3 times a week. After several months, exercise alone was just as effective as medication. And decades of research from Harvard Medical School show that youth who regularly get over 7 hours of sleep have dramatically lower rates of depression and anxiety. We all know this advice: move your body, eat healthier, sleep more, but we underestimate how profoundly these basics shape how we feel. Third, how connected we are. The Harvard study of adult development is the longest-running study ever conducted on human well-being, following hundreds of participants from young adulthood all the way into old age. And after over 80 years of data, the takeaway was remarkably simple. The strongest predictor of who had a long, satisfying life wasn't money or achievement. It was the quality of close relationships. Not because relationships eliminate hardship, but because reliable connection trains the brain to expect support instead of threat. So, whether you intend to or not, you are already training your brain every single day. If that training is producing anxiety, depression, or dissatisfaction, it's not a personal failure, it's a predictable outcome. But here's the good news. Since this training is learned, it can be changed. Here's something you can actually try. The next time you feel yourself spiraling or ruminating, stop and ask yourself one question. What story am I telling myself right now? Is it, I failed because I'm a failure, or my future is doomed? It doesn't really matter. Don't argue with it. Don't judge it. Just notice it and let it pass. Then interrupt it with one grounding action. For me, I like to run, or meditate, or journal. For you, you might like to talk to a friend, or cook, or listen to music. You're not trying to solve everything in that moment. You're just stopping the story from feeding itself. Remember our wolves? When their environment supported their needs again, their behavior went back to normal. I like to think the same is true for us. There's an old Cherokee parable about the 2 wolves fighting inside each of us. One is fear, ego, and anger. The other is love, hope, and compassion. The child asks, which one wins? The answer is simple: the one you feed. Here's what I eventually realized. When my worldview was organized around fear of rejection, failure, or meaninglessness, my mental health deteriorated. When my worldview was oriented around love for others, hard work, something beyond myself, everything downstream changed. This generation is not broken. Like the wolves, we're responding in predictable ways to the environments we're embedded in. And while we can't always change our circumstances, we can change how we respond to them. Which wolf will you feed? Thank you.